and let staff take a look at, so I support a deferral on this particular area
Yes.
for now. Anyways,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Height next, and then Columbus. Sorry, Mike, I did see Noel's hand first. No, go ahead, Councillor Height, please.
Change my motion if I could get it read to me by our deputy clerk.
Okay, then I'm going to entertain Councillor
Yeah,
Columbus first,
so-
and then I'll...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a major issue that affects properties and livelihoods, like Councillor Black mentioned. And I think the best thing to do is send it back to staff and get a more detailed report, because when you're dealing with affecting people's properties and livelihoods, we'll get some flack over it. And I think we should not be making a quick decision on it.
Thank you. Councillor Height, now to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to be clear, we're talking about retail market impact studies.
That's correct.
That's new businesses wanting to come to Norfolk, being set through the ringers to come up with all of these studies to assess our retail situation. It has nothing to do with putting people out of business or affecting the small business owners. It is just studies and red tape for companies looking to come here. Right? They have to reference our downtowns. I think around the table we realize our downtowns are already, they have some problems. This isn't going to help any of it. So I'm fine with the staff report coming forward. I'd like to see the retail studies strengthening a little weaker. I don't know that we need it, and I'm okay with the report if that's how we can come back with it on that particular
Okay,
topic.
Councillor, in light of that, are you prepared to defer?
I guess would it be a
a decision?
deferral, or do we provide direction to staff
Well-
to come back? I forget what we did 2 weeks ago on some of these issues. I forget how we handled it.
Well, I think what we've done in a couple of others, we have set a time frame for a special report to come back.
Okay.
Pam, do you want to comment before I
Yeah.
seek direction?
Yeah, through the chair, what I may suggest, it's our consultants and staff's recommendation, as you see in this report on pages 28 and 29. But if council chooses not to want a market impact study and they're considering something else, I believe it would be more appropriate this time to give us that direction so that we can start to formulate those policies that will keep the whole project moving forward. And I think we're understanding the comments we're hearing. And also I know that there is a commitment to continue working with the Simcoe BIA and South Coast and any other group that wants to provide input. And we would be able to take those policies to those groups. So perhaps maybe instead of the market impact study, maybe to consider other items to be included for what can be a positive for the downtowns, and that will give us some general direction to move forward with policies in that regard.
So you would like us to actually still direct that an amendment on this particular recommendation be made rather than just a deferral?
Through you, the chair, yes, that
Okay.
would continue moving the official plan review along.
Okay. Then once again, I think I'm seeking direction from council as to what we would like to see in place of simply a retail market impact study recommendation.
I guess I'm looking for a report that doesn't hinge on our downtowns. If you have to do a retail study, make it a quick one, and that's it. I'm not getting into the whole downtown areas and the umpteen other items on here. I'm talking, when it refers to downtown studies, do not force retailers to spend $40,000 doing a market analysis with peer reviews. So I'm looking for staff to come back with a report to say, okay, we need one for this, and the rest of them we don't need as it refers to our downtowns. If they said they needed it, I don't need it, but I'm just going with what they said.
I understand, Councillor, but there are 5 downtowns in our county, and some of them are, in fact, suffering more seriously than others, I think, right now. Councillor Brunton?
Well, as far as retail studies, they may be old, but I think when we went through some of these, and I recall the Superstore out here and Zellers or whatever the name of those are, there were retail studies done that encompassed the whole drawing area for those areas. I mean, they go back a few years, but I bet you if you dust those reports off, you won't find a big difference. And those retail studies encompassed our drawing area, which I recall is 30,000 plus for the area that comes central here. there's some old, I recall seeing those studies, and they were paid for by developers and peer-reviewed by developers and so forth. So they may be old, but I bet you when you look at things, some of it hasn't changed a lot in the last 10 or 15 years. So anyways, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, Council, I'm going to be so bold as to suggest maybe some wording, unless you have something more specific, Councillor Height, that you want. And that might be, and I'm going to be looking to you to move it if you find it acceptable, and that is that the recommendation around issue number 47 be broadened to look at other alternatives to impacts on existing retail or commercial. So in other words, that would broaden the scope. We're not saying we're not going to do these things. We're going to broaden the scope and look for other alternative impacts of such proposed new development. And that's pretty wordy, but I'm seeing a couple of heads nodding that might provide the direction that staff might be looking for. Okay, maybe the deputy clerk will capture that. Councillor Black, do you want to offer some help here as well?
You know what? Maybe I don't say this often enough about you, Councillor Oliver, but you are a smart guy.
No.
And that, I think that is probably a better way to go, in that we're leaving what we have there. We're adding something that we'd like to see this new direction. So we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. And when we get it back, then we'll have more information in order to make an informed decision rather than, and I'm wondering, you know, if I'm seeing Pam's head nodding up and down there. I'm wondering what Pam has to say about your motion, but I would be prepared to move that if Pam thinks it's something that staff can work with.
I wonder if, Councillor, we'll go to her in a second, but maybe the deputy clerk can just read what she's gleaned from this little bit of discussion, and then staff could react to it, as well as yourselves.
Thank you. Through the chair, that the recommendation around issue number 47 be broadened to look at other alternatives to impacts on existing retail or commercial respecting proposed new development.
So we would be broadening the scope of the studies that might be coming out of this recommendation to look at other alternatives to the existing impacts on retail and or commercial from new development.
So I just wonder,
Does that capture what you were sort of looking for?
Through you, the chair, yes, we understand, and we can work with that.
Okay, Council,
I would move it if you're
All
looking
right.
for a...
I know Councillor Height raised this issue first. I will defer to him if he wishes to be the mover, but I'm sure...
So moved.
Okay, thanks,
Yeah, that's
Councillor.
fine. That's fine.
All right, do you want to hear that again, Council, before
Yeah,
I ask?
maybe one more time, please, if you don't
Okay.
mind.
So through the chair to committee, that the recommendation around issue number 47 be broadened to look at other alternatives to impacts on existing retail or commercial respecting proposed new development.
It's a little wordy, but I think it captures what we've been discussing. I'm going to call the question. Those that would support that? I see no one opposed. Thank you. So we'll delete that. Okay, that does allow us, I think, to move on to page number 30, which talks about a number of recommendations, and 31, really around downtown revitalization. Anything on page 30 that anyone wishes to raise? Mayor Luke?
Through you to staff, basically the way I see page 30 and on into 31 is we simply would want, this would put something in writing into our official plan, encouraging a number of things which are all make sense to me, be it signage, be it establishing BIAs, festivals, special events, murals on the wall, pop-up uses. We don't have those policies written now into our official plan, do we?
Not to that level of detail, no.
So I only see that, and you might say, well, of course we support it, we don't have to put that in writing, but I think it's important to say we need to do everything that we can. Whether we see a future in our downtowns in the retail, Mr. Chair, the real retail component or retail sector in the down, of course, things are changing. regionalized shopping facilities, mostly on major artery roads and highways, yeah, that's what has happened. But at the same time, that doesn't mean we can't put policies in place that will say, yeah, this is acceptable, this is acceptable. We encourage these things, and I think that's what staff is saying. Thank you.
You're
I
welcome.
certainly support it.
Councillor Black, then Height.
So, yeah, Mr. Chairman, certainly I support this, and I can tell you, if this council isn't already aware, that, of course, downtown Simcoe is, I believe, the first BIA established in Norfolk County in 1978. And so we do encourage others to do that. And public places, I can tell you that downtown Simcoe has utilized this front yard here and Linwood Arts as public places to try and establish it that way. Cultural facilities, of course, they've tried to do that and encourage that. And small business counseling, they've actually had workshops themselves to promote that and work with others. All of these, the murals and so forth, the wayfinding, and actually the wayfinding, we tried to establish that and didn't get too much support from council on wayfinding and kiosks. I do have a question.
Okay, please. On page 30, Councillor, or 31?
Yeah, it's on the 48, downtown revitalization, and everywhere, each one of these, it says to encourage, will encourage, to encourage. So please explain to me, how does council encourage, what's the value of that, what's the authority of it, what's the strength of it, or is it just paying lip service?
I think that's really ends up being up to council. Encourage can be providing financial support. It can be through bylaws that allow things to happen. Things like the set up a process, I think last summer, to use a parking space in front of a store to have an outdoor cafe, something like that. So there's a lot of things that you can do to make things happen or encourage things to happen in an active way and in partnership with other people in the community, to the business coalitions, the BIAs, the arts and culture groups, and that kind of thing. So it's not council doing everything by itself, but opening the door and working with other organizations to make things happen.
You're welcome. Councillor Height.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to staff, I guess I'm looking at all these options here, and the very first one kind of pops right off the page right away. What we're going to encourage BIAs. Does that mean we'll be discouraging chambers or boards of trades? Will they be calling me next saying, why wasn't I on the list? And how will we encourage something that we already have in existence and we work with them as a valued partner now?
It's not to do away with those organizations, but BIAs have specific abilities and responsibilities in the Municipal Act that a Chamber of Commerce or Business Coalition doesn't necessarily have. They're structured under the Municipal Act, so there's different authorities that a BIA can have that those organizations aren't able to do.
Okay, well, like I've talked to my chamber about becoming a BIA, and then they laughed me right out of the room. They're not interested in any way, shape, or form of a BIA, so now you're encouraging it, and my business people say, absolutely not. So what type of position will that put us in?
Do you want to comment, Matt? I could offer a comment as well, but I'd like to hear what you have to say.
My understanding of Chamber of Commerce is they have a larger mandate geographically. They're made up of business organizations throughout the area, whereas a BIA has a specific responsibility for a specific geographic area and can partner with the municipality in making physical improvements on the public roads, sidewalks, put various programs into effect into that specific area and collect a fee for from the member properties. So they're quite different organizations. I think they can work together. They don't have to be opposed to each other at all.
Okay, I'm gonna go down to item D now here. It says the full use of tools available to the county. We have small business counseling, a reduction in or exemption from development charges, and community planning permits. Now, does that mean a reduction or exemption from the community planning permits as well?
No, it's not a reduction or exemption. Community planning permits is a process that is allowed under the Planning Act, which combines the zoning process, the site plan process, and the minor variance process, puts it into one process. It's a way of trying to streamline some development approvals. You have to have a specific policy framework in place to take advantage of it, but it is a way of where you can potentially reduce the red tape involved in association with allowing various types of development.
Okay, thank you for clearing
And we
that
don't
up.
have, sorry, Councillor, but we don't have that in our toolbox presently.
No, you don't.
Okay.
And even by mentioning it, you have to, if you want to take advantage of it, you have to do a planning study and set up the framework for using it.
Okay.
But it is something that you can do if you wish to do so.
Okay. Sorry,
Okay.
Councillor, carry on.
No problem. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And up here, you meant under DI or D1, small business counseling. Isn't that a function of, say, our AcDev department? Why would we have to put that in our official plan?
It doesn't have to be in the official plan. It's just that, and when I read the Municipal Act as part of the commercial report, there are things I think that the small business counseling can do in terms of stimulating development and perhaps even providing some incentives to development. And most of downtown development is small business, or can be kind of like a location for incubator type businesses starting out, and use the small business, the tools that are available under the Act might be a way of stimulating some business activity in the downtown. So it's a way of pointing that out as an activity that you might do.
Okay, and then my last one, and the biggest beef that I have here, is the reduction in or exemption from development charges. I didn't think that was even legal, for starters. And who has the power to give that reduction or exemption? Because development needs to pay for development. That's why we have those charges.
The Norfolk County Development Charges bylaw today provides an exemption for development in the downtowns, and that's part of the incentive package for downtowns. It's perfectly legal. Many municipalities provide that kind of exemption in their development charge bylaws.
I mean, do we ever get a report on those? I can't recall one. I don't remember it ever coming to council for us looking for the exemption figures.
I think it was one of the new items under our community improvement program incentives, I think.
Perhaps, Mr. Chair, if I
Baird?
could comment. The development charges study is done every 4 years by our Treasury Department, and that results in the creation of a development charges bylaw, And within that, as Matt has indicated, it provides the exemptions. There's exemptions for agriculture. There's exemptions for brownfield sites. These are all needed to incentivize those locations where we're really trying to get some growth. So yeah.
we as council only see the exemptions every 4 years? How much money they've been exempted?
No. Development charges are payable when there's a building permit issued, where it would be applicable. What I was suggesting is council goes through the development charge review every 4 years. If you're looking for a list of which exemptions occurred, we do have a brochure that explains that. I'd be glad to share that with council so you know who is required to pay and pay what and who is not. Short of that, we collect them on a daily basis. Every time a permit's issued that would be applicable.
But I think, Chris, what the councillor is asking is, does a list exist of business or proponents who have been granted the exemption within the previous year, as an example?
That decision is done through the bylaw, again, at the issuance of the building permit. We track those that are charged. We don't necessarily track those that are not.
Okay.
It would probably take a bit of work to do, but if we're looking at, if council wants to see a little bit more about what sort of funds are collected annually, it would be easier to do that than the exemption piece. But I'd be glad to share. We've got a 2-page pamphlet that really explains things quite well, and I'll share that with council right away, and then maybe that could be another topic of discussion another time.
Okay. Is that sufficient, councillor?
I think that report's really important for us to see how much money we are giving away. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Not giving away, just not collecting. Councillor Columbus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to the planners here and Matt, downtown revitalization, have you looked at how home industries and home occupations are impacting downtown revitalization? Like hairdressing shops, different things that are happening out in the countryside. All you need, perhaps, is internet hookup and you can be in business. Is it having an impact on our downtowns?
It's very hard to determine what that impact is. It's hard. The other thing that's becoming more and more prevalent would be online shopping, where you buy goods online and have them delivered to your door in a couple of days. Historically, that hasn't been factored into any of the retail market studies. It hasn't been that high a percentage of total retail sales, but anecdotally, it seems that that's a growing way of spending retail dollars. But the impact of that on commercial floor space in the downtown or elsewhere, I really don't know at this point.
You're welcome. In a sense, Council, we've been discussing items both on page 30, 31, and even 32. So I need some direction. Anything further on those several issues which relate to downtowns? Okay, all right. We're going to move on then, if that's okay. I'm now on page 33. Residential development, anything on page 33? Councillor Brunton and then Black.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to start by, I had asked last time to get the urban boundary maps from staff. I don't know if you have them with you or do we? Like I looked at the back of this, and this, to me, it's not this residential study report. There's mapping in there that shows the urban areas, but it does not, those aren't the urban boundaries.
Okay, I think Mary can answer that, Councillor.
Through the chair, we are ready to do a presentation actually on this piece, And those maps do in fact show the urban boundary. It is the broken line that's all the way around. That is the current designation for the urban settlement areas in the official plan.
So what these are, based on this study here, you're saying?
No, in our issues and options report, I think she's talking about, Councillor. No, you are. You're talking about the small one. I'm sorry. You
Well,
were right there.
okay, I assume it was changed then at some point, because I remember where the urban boundaries were at one time, and it took in some farmland around the urban area, at least of Simcoe I'm familiar with. But are you saying these are the urban boundary definitions or areas now?
Through the chair, the boundaries in the presentation, which is what the piece you're looking at, you're outside of the issues and options, you've gone to the presentation we want to do to council. The maps that are within that presentation show the current boundaries as set out in the official plan. They may have changed over time slightly.
So when you do the OP update, you change that, say 5 years ago, 10 years ago?
Through the chair, I'm not familiar with us having changed, but you're remembering something that I need a little more specifics, I guess, about where you're thinking there's something that was in the urban that's not there now.
Well,
I'm sorry, Council, I'm going to interject for a second. And I don't want to cut you off, but is it specifically relevant to what we're now talking about on page 53, for example, any of those recommendations?
On page 53?
I'm sorry, page 33.
Well, no, but it has a bearing on their forecast for residential development, potential number of housing units, et cetera. To me, it does. And I guess I'm just wondering what happened, I guess.
Well, I think staff have told us we're going to get a presentation shortly, not today, I don't imagine. Yes, it is today. Okay, I'm sorry. We will get to this. So if you don't mind, can we just hold off and you'll raise that issue then?
Yeah, okay, I'll wait and listen, but I do have some concerns. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Black next.
Actually, just showing Councillor Brunton on, again, the website. I think that's all updated because that's Rich Roberts doing the GIS work. Yeah, I think that probably comes from Rich Roberts as well. So, just,
Okay.
yeah. I'm just showing them the mapping. It's all accessible. And looking at number 54 on page 33, and this was one I think I had a concern before, mixed-use policies, various sections. Over on the recommendation, says add policies. Anyway, what does this mean? Does this mean that at Walmart or the Canadian Tire Mall or Sobeys or the Norfolk Mall, for that matter, in Tillsonburg, their boundary, does that mean that you would allow, the policy would allow an apartment building to be built on a commercial site?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. That's all I need. I'm going to move a motion to remove that because I think this is in total contradiction of trying to protect downtowns, if you're going to at all, because what we're trying to encourage is more residential development there, and now we're going to allow apartment buildings in the commercial area. So I'd like to remove it.
Okay.
So move if that's in order.
Yep, absolutely. Anything is in order relative to these recommendations. So Councillor Black's motion would be to delete the recommendation associated with issue number 54. Further speakers from council. Councillor Geisens first.
Well, I won't support that. We have to take Councillor Sonnenberg talked about, we need to look what's happening in our downtowns. There are going to be less commercial, there's no doubt about it. How you're going to fix your downtown is by bringing people to the downtown, where you're going to consolidate your commercial part of it and still have people. You're going to have more parking and more parks, which you do have here in Simcoe and everything like that. To me, and if you know what's happening in the States, there was a study the other day that talked about some of the big stores like Macy's and everything like that are actually losing because Amazon Now, it's all online, and theoretically, they were losing something like $1 million over other years, simply because, and if the younger generation keeps going this way, it's going to get worse and worse. So we are going to lose other commercials, whether it's a Walmart, I don't know if it ever will, they may get into that business as well. But we need to bring people to the downtown. You talked about a little while ago about having a place where you can sit outside and have a drink and everything. Those are the types of things that if you're going to want to bring your downtown back, that's how you're going to do it as far as I'm concerned. And I will not support what your motion says. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Black, I'll let you speak further.
In response to Councillor Geisens, I don't know if he understands my motion or not, or maybe I don't understand what this says. Would this exclude apartment buildings in downtowns by removing this?
No.
Okay, thank you. So this has nothing to do with the downtown. This has to do with allowing an apartment building, say at the Walmart site, out in the parking lot. That's what this allows. Or the Norfolk Township Mall. They could put well, I doubt it because they don't have water and sewer there, but anyway, just using that as an example, the Sobeys Mall. They could put an apartment building down there. So I don't think that is an appropriate thing to do. If somebody wanted to do that, certainly they could come forward with an amendment to official plan policy, and we could deal with it specifically one-on-one at that time to see what the impacts would be. But to allow it as a right, I don't think it's appropriate. Now we're trying to do something else. This is totally contradictory.
Okay, thank you. Any further speakers on Councillor Black's motion? Any specific comment on staff on this, or Mary?
Would just like to clarify that this is proposing mixed-use developments. It's not a separate apartment building in the commercial, institutional, or shopping center. It's saying you keep that main floor being commercial, but you could add above it with residential,
right.
Just so council's clear.
Thank you. Councillor Wells.
We hear Councillor Black's motion, because I didn't understand.
Okay. Yep, I think the deputy clerk has it, but I'll let the deputy clerk tell you what we've got.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Black that the recommendation associated with issue number 54 be deleted.
So in other words, Councillor Wells, that recommendation on the right-hand side to add those policies that would allow mixed-use developments in those three areas, commercial, shopping center, and institutional, that would not be allowed. It would not allow that type of residential use even on second or third floors. Okay? In that case, Council, I will call the question on this motion. Those in favor? Those opposed? That motion is lost, so the recommendation stays as in the report. Council, this might be the right time for us to ask our staff, especially in light of Councillor Brunton's question earlier, to do the brief presentation on residential land use and the report, if you're agreeable to that. How long will the presentation take, staff and Matt?
5 to 10 minutes.
Okay, because I do want to have a short break at 3 o'clock, but it sounds like we'll be okay then. Yes. Carry on, please.
The residential land supply analysis report attempts to answer a few basic questions. Is there a sufficient supply of land designated for residential development to meet the growth needs to 2036, according to the growth forecasts that have been prepared for the county as part of the population projection study? Another question is there potential for an alternative forecast projecting a higher rate of residential development? And if so, is there still sufficient land available to meet the residential demands resulting from this alternative forecast? Another question is, can the county meet the housing mix and affordability targets that have been recently established through the approval of the Norfolk County Housing Study Official Plan Review 2016. And the final question is, can the county meet the 20% target of residential development in urban areas being through infill, intensification, and redevelopment? And that's a target that is currently in the official plan. This table shows recent experience in building permits and housing completions in Norfolk County from over the last 5 years. The Hempson forecast predicted 934 housing completions over that time period. Looking at Canada Mortgage and Housing data over that same period, 1,541 units were completed. There was 178 residential units demolished, so the net actual housing growth was 1,363, which is about just over 400 units more than the Hempson forecast, a difference of about 46%. The Hempson forecast was done basically on the 2011 census rate when the province and Norfolk County were just starting to come out of the recession. So it was growth had slowed down considerably over that time period. So based on that quick analysis, there seems to be room for perhaps an alternative forecast that is higher than the Hempson forecast. I'll get into that. The next slide compares the Hempson forecast with the alternative forecast that I prepared and it does so by community as well. Overall, when you look at the bottom row, county total, there's in 2016 an estimated 25,800 housing units in the county. The Hempson forecast estimated that over the next 20-year periods to be 3,570 new units, and in the alternative forecast would be about 5,300 units, which is relates to, I think, about 285 new units a year. So it's about close to 50% higher growth rate. The next, I don't expect you to read that, but that's the kind of inventory tables that were put together for each of the 6 urban areas. That's the one for Simcoe, but there's similar ones done for Port Dover, Waterford, Delhi, Port Rowan, and Cortland. The hamlets were done separately. So it was a fairly detailed analysis that, based on the information that was put together from the GIS staff on vacant residential lands within the existing urban area boundaries. We did not go beyond the existing urban area boundaries because the test was to see if they're adequate. The next few pages, I won't go over them in detail, but it shows in green the primary vacant residential lands in the urban areas. The one thing I should point out is that some of the zoning categories, such as land use categories such as the downtowns, allow residential development above stores or on vacant lots and that, but unless there was a specific development proposal that we are aware of, we did not include that potential because it's very hard to estimate. Some other commercial designations, such as neighborhood commercial zones, also allow apartments above a store, that kind of thing, but that wasn't included either as potential. I'll just go now, I think, to the slide on the provincial policy statement. And it has a number of, I guess, rules or parameters that we need to look at in terms of housing supply. One is there sufficient short-term supply? And that's measured by a 3-year supply of land on zone sites, registered or draft-approved subdivisions. So lands that are either able to be developed today or can be put on the market very quickly. They've basically gone through most of the planning approvals and can respond to market conditions. Long-term supply is, in the PPS, is estimated at 10 years. There should be enough land designated for residential development at any one time to meet at least a 10-year supply of housing. And the other issue is land needs, and we're allowed to plan for a 20-year time period. I think that really should be, we need to meet the short-term supply needs, but we really need to look at 20 years because of the time frames involved in going through official plan review processes and that. We really, I think, need to look at 20 years. So the tables that were done for each of the urban areas looked at all three. This is the one that's table is for Norfolk County as a whole, and basically what it says is that within the existing urban areas, there is a sufficient supply of land under the Hempson forecast, and there's a sufficient supply of land even under the alternative forecast, the higher forecast, to meet the projected growth needs over the next 20 years. And that's I think it's the case for all the density units. There are specific issues, I think, in some communities relating to particular types of housing. Delhi, I think, has a shortage of apartment sites. There's only, I think, one zone site that I'm aware of in the downtown area, and really there should be an alternative site or land for apartment development in Delhi. I think there's also in Waterford a need for some more higher density housing sites as well. But overall, the land in each of the 6 urban areas is sufficient under both forecasts. In some areas, I think Simcoe and Waterford, there may be a need to look at additional lands, probably in about a 5-year time frame at the next official plan review process, but they can't be justified at this point in time. And so the answers to the question, is there sufficient supply of land designated for residential development to meet the growth needs to 2036? Yes, there is. Is there potential for an existing or an alternative forecast, and there sufficient land available under that forecast? And again, the answer is yes. We did look at housing mix and affordability targets, and overall there is sufficient potential land within the urban areas to meet those forecasts, though there's some individual problems in some communities. And can the infilling target of 20% be met? And the answer to that is yes as well. I think that is the end of that presentation.
Maybe a few questions on the presentation, and I will get back to you, Councillor Brunton, and your issue before about the boundaries. Councillor Columbus first.
Yeah, question that I've thought about quite a bit. Do we have any indication of how many single residences are owner-occupied versus tenant-occupied? You talked about apartments, and we pretty well know that those are tenant-occupied. We have a lot of farmhouses out there, that surplus dwellings and that are tenant-occupied. Do we have numbers for those?
There are numbers for that, but in terms of this forecast, we didn't look at that mix.
So I know it's outside the urban area, that's for sure, but I just wonder if there's a way to get a handle on that. You know, we're talking about shortage of certain kind of housing, and there are a lot of single-family residences that are tenant-occupied.
The census data is now starting to come out, and that would give us more up-to-date information. I'm not sure that the tenure data is out, but it'll be out shortly.
You're welcome. Councillor Sonnenberg.
Thank you. This report deals with garden suites. We're talking about housing availability, affordability. We have a policy in effect that allows people in town to make an apartment in their house, as long as you have another access. So you could make a basement into an apartment as long as you have a separate entrance. I think we're missing the boat here by not allowing this in the country. As far as I know, it's not allowed in rural areas. Is that right?
Through Councillor Columber, that's correct.
Well, there are a lot of houses out in the country that are under-occupied, if I could use that word. My house alone, my last child has left. I've got ample room to put a apartment in the basement. Separate access, lots of water, lots of parking, you know, septic bed that would probably serve 100 people, but I'm not allowed to have an apartment in my house because it's in the country. And I think that would do a good service to a lot of people, because it would be affordable, it would be a second income for the house owner. They may not have to leave because they've got that second income now. So I guess this is a provincial thing. I don't know if we can do this without a provincial direction, but it's something I've always thought about. There are a lot of houses out in the country that could serve two families. So just your thoughts on that, please. Anybody?
Through you, Mr. Chair. You raised some good questions, Councillor Sonnenberg. When the time that the secondary units was put into our policies and provisions, the mandate or the intent was to serve those areas where people could use walkability, be in close proximity to shopping, whether it be Fanshawe or just those in need of housing that are normally located in our urban areas. That's where the need for those uses arise, and that was the intent of the policy at the time. I'm sure our housing unit could speak more to that at a further time for council to give further information, and the housing study is part of the official plan review, and I know Mary has more details about when that information is coming forward as well.
Councillor Height, and then I'm going to come back to Councillor Brunton because I don't want to forget his request, at least for some clarification. So Councillor Height?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. While we're on garden suites, I'm going to move a motion that we do not go with the 10-year plan. I like the 20-year idea better.
Okay,
And-
Councillor, I wasn't quite there yet. I'm still looking at just questions regarding, I thought, regarding this housing study in general, if you don't mind.
Okay.
And for sure, we'll get to you. Councillor Breton, you had raised the question earlier about our existing urban boundaries and how they are presented graphically, and we've now seen that. Do you have further questions? Okay, would you like to proceed?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my question is, how are the urban boundaries established? What's the rationale behind where the lines are?
Through the chair, the establishment of those boundaries was done a long time ago before any of the three of us were around. So I heard a little bit of stories about how somebody stood and drew lines on the map and the councils agreed to it. There was not the requirements we now have in the provincial policy statement where you have to have the 3-year and the 10-year and then, as we said, the 20-year supply. Those weren't as stringent, or they weren't even in place in those days. So we were blessed with very extravagant, shall I call, urban boundaries. And so over the years, we really haven't needed to change them since the early 70s. But we are, as our consultant has said, getting very close to the mark when we need to do a study where we look at alternative expansions, because maybe by the next time we will have a basis on which to support some expansion, but we should be looking in different directions. Would be my recommendation to council, that we don't look, let's say, for one urban area just going to the north or to the east. You should look at all directions and then come up with a plan that would say, well, here, looking at all these factors, this is the direction we probably should go if we need expansion. But I'd like to see and recommend that that be done for the next time that you do the review.
Well, my comment, and I'll give you an example. Just look at the map number 2 of Port Dover, for an example. And I want to get away from Simcoe because I could sit and talk about that for a long time. But if you look at the map of Dover, for example, the urban boundary line is all over the map, if I can use that expression. You look at the west side, like, does that line go right through the middle of farms? Does it take in an entire farm? If you look on the east side, it jogs all over. And my point is, and I support what your report says about do we have a supply? There's no question, I guess, in that regards. But if and when we look at this, somehow you've got to look at, you don't cut a farm in half. I went through the existing boundaries when they were drawn up for municipalities. Some of them go right through the middle of fields in the middle of nowhere. And all I'm saying is you have to not only look at how it encompasses somebody's farm, not just part of their farm, but you also have to look at the economics of it. And I'll give you an example. We allowed the development south of the cemetery here in Simcoe. And people tell me they feel somewhat, separated from the actual town. You go through an industrial area to a subdivision that sits behind the cemetery. They don't even feel like they're part of the town compared to other areas. And I've often said, and it was an imaginary line on Ireland Road, that the boundary, services were installed to encompass lands east of Ireland Road. They were put in years ago. There's some reports that you should still have that talk about the feasibility and cost to develop lands all around. And I'm only referring to Simcoe now, but I'm sure other urban areas must have carried out those studies where it was more practical to develop because it was cheaper for a developer to put services in. So I guess I'm too late, but when you do look at that, I think it's very important because if somebody wants to buy a farm and develop it in the future, they don't want just part of it that's practical. They want the whole farm, I would think. So I'll leave it at that. I guess I'm too late to change your mind. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Councillor. Council, we have a lot of work to do still on continuing the report. We've got another presentation that I've now asked the deputy clerk to set up for 4 o'clock. I'm going to suggest a 10-minute break, if that's in order. We'll come back. Councillor Height, you're my first speaker then, dealing with garden suites on that section, okay? So we'll come back at 5 minutes after 3. Thank you.